So I want to say to our participants, greetings. Thank you for joining us for this program in honor of Indigenous Peoples Month. We're excited to have here author Atava Garcia Swiecicki. Here, Atava is an author, teacher, clinical herbalist, and founder of the Ancestral Apothecary School of Herbal, Folk, and Indigenous Medicine. I'll turn it right over to Atava.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Well, welcome everybody. Glad to be zooming into your neck of the woods. I'm zooming from occupied Southern Tewa Pueblo territory, colonially called Albuquerque, New Mexico. I've lived here for the past 2 years, but spent most of my life and all of my adult life until now in Oakland, California, Huichin, Ohlone territory. And I'm grateful to Christopher and Sarah for inviting me to speak on my book, to do a little book presentation. I will be talking about, here's my book, the Curanderx Toolkit, Reclaiming Ancestral Plant Medicine and Rituals for Healing. It came out recently in July. And I do want to share more about my background and the research in the book, but I am interested always in who's here and even what your understanding or relationship to curanderismo or traditional, Latinx medicine, or even traditional medicine of any kind, because I like to say we all come from people with herbal traditions. My own personal background is Mexican, Polish, Hungarian, and Navajo. So I feel like I come from a lot of herbal traditions, and this book is the Mexican-American lineage, tribute to that and to my experience with it. But yeah, if you are willing to just say something in the chat about, even if you're brand new to it, you're just showed up to this event because it sounded cool, it'll help me kind of tailor how I do the conversation. That would help me. So this book, I'll give you all a few minutes to maybe type something in the chat. This book came out in July of this year. I've been working on it for the past 3 years, a little extension because of the pandemic. But I'll say before it was a book, it's a class that I created, and that's a little bit of the story of the book. And it's in the book is that I'm an herbalist, and as an herbal student in schools, and this is in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area in California, very, very diverse community of people. I was always surprised that in herbal education, a lot of what was taught was really from more of a white European centric perspective, and also very much more scientific. And even though there's so many rich cultural traditions, there, that they weren't really represented in the herbal classroom. So I started my own journey of, I would say, reconnecting and studying with teachers, gathering information, remembering practices. So I'm gonna just check your chats. So Rebecca, thank you for sharing. Oh, great. And you work with at-risk youth as a trauma therapist. Yeah, I feel like some of the practices that curanderismo has to offer are extremely beneficial for trauma of people of all ages. So I'm glad you're here. Thank you for coming. And great. And you're also Latinx. And welcome, Neen. Hopefully pronouncing your name right. Okay, and you're Puerto Rican. So yeah, some of the practices, as I've learned, overlap between different Latinx countries. And part of what I did in my book is I featured 13 different community healers, and one of them is Puerto Rican. So that was part of, it's part of the story of the book. Thanks for introducing yourself.
Yes.
Whoever just came in on
Nada más.
iPhone, can you
Instant todo
mute?
sacarlo.
Please.
¿Cuántas leíste?
This one.
Sarah, maybe you
Sorry,
can.
can you mute, please, whoever is iPhone, please mute your camera. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for sharing, Nina, about your journey with cancer. I'm also a cancer survivor, and I always say that, the doctors removed the cancer, but it was my community and these practices and ceremony and herbs that really helped me with the deep healing. So thank you for sharing. Catherine, welcome from South Texas, probably very, very rich in traditional medicine there. Great. And Caitlin, herbalism, thank you for coming, and you're Colombian. Awesome. Thank you all for introducing yourself. And if you just came, you want to just say, introduce yourself and whatever experience you might have with curanderismo. So I'll just share a little bit of my story. I'm going to read a little bit from the book, but as I said, I identify as a multiracial, detribalized person of mixed heritage. I was born in Detroit, Michigan, where all of my grandparents immigrated from all the places that they came from, Mexico, Poland, Hungary, and ended up, all of my ancestors or grandparents came there for the kind of the boom of the auto industry boom in the 20s and 30s. So both of my parents were born there, and I was also born in Detroit. And I always like to think about culture and how it's passed on or how it's broken and the pressures of assimilation. And one marker of it is language for me. And all of my grandparents had a first language besides English, but my parents grew up where like Spanish or Polish was only spoken, right, in whispers by adults. So they did not learn, their mother tongue. And so I also grew up only being taught English. And I think that's similar with culture. So in my family, some of the traditions of my ancestors persisted, but also a lot was, I always like to say, quote, lost, because I think things are never lost. We just kind of maybe lose our relationship to them. Thank you, Yvonne. Oh, and you're from Mexico, so maybe this is a lot of things, So as a young adult, I became very curious and learning more as I started to study herbalism, became more interested in what the ancestral practices of my own lineages were. And I had never met a curandera. I didn't grow up with them in my family or community, and like a lot of my friends and colleagues and students that I've met since then who really still grew up very much in the culture. But when I was in my early 30s, trying to think about the timeline, I met a curandera. I was working in an herbal store in San Francisco, and literally walked in the person who really changed my life, Doña Enriqueta Contreras, who just had such a commanding presence. And I was like, who is she? I need to be around her. It was very much a somatic experience, wanting to connect with her. And so she turns out is a curandera from Oaxaca. She's Zapotec. She's a midwife or a partera, an herbalist. And so that really began my journey of studying with her and many, many other people since then. What I like to say about curanderismo, it seems like some of you are at different, places of work, connected to it or not, but it's the word curanderismo means a lot of different things. There's a lot of similarities, and there's also a lot of differences. So there's similarities such as maybe the herbs that we use. There may be ones that in different regions, whether you're talking the United States Southwest or Mexico or Guatemala, we may find some of the herbs similar. And then some of the ways we talk about healing, the practices such as limpia, or illnesses like susto. There may be common language, and then there's also a lot of variety and difference. One thing I really like about it is it's not like an institutionalized form of healing, so it really allows for everybody's creativity to emerge. And it also really allows, part of this tradition is allowing people, when they have a gift, like a given gift at birth, which we call the don, the gift, for that to emerge and for them to practice, or to bring that out as their healing gift, as their healing offering. When I interviewed some of my teachers for the book, one in particular, Estela Roman, who's a curandera from Cuernavaca, she told me that, and maybe it's changing now, but for a while in Mexico, like that wasn't even necessarily a term used, curanderismo. It was just our medicine, our traditional medicine. It was just the way people did things. But based on my research, it seems like that term maybe started in New Mexico, where I live now, by Dr. Cheo Torres, who also runs a 2-week curanderismo class every July here and has been for over 20 years. He told me, I interviewed him, he said he was just trying to find a way to describe the traditional medicine system, and we call a healer a curandera or curandero or curanderex. So maybe that's when the word started, but it basically translates as like kind of the traditional medicine healing systems. It could be of Mexico, but it's also in other Latinx countries. So I began, after, fast forward many years after studying curanderismo and herbalism, I actually came to the University of New Mexico class and just was blown away by how they created this offering, this class offering, where they brought in a lot of different curanderos, curanderas. And so when I went back to Oakland, I was inspired to create my own class, which started in 2011. So it's over 10 years old. And began just teaching herbal medicine, but really bringing in the cultural roots and cultural practices, such as the limpia, which I'll talk about, baños, and bringing in a lot of different practitioners or curanderas to share. So when I wrote this book, I wrote the book. I had so many handouts and so many notes after teaching for 10 years that it became a book. So the book is really meant to be like a guide and offering really a support for people who are curious. This is their ancestral medicine, and you maybe are wanting to learn more. I try to make it very user-friendly and very, has a lot of practical information, from how to make a herbal tea to an herbal tincture to how to do your own self-limpia. I really wanted it to be able to go out and to really support people, primarily for their own healing, their own self-care, their own self-healing. One thing I say in the intro, and I will say here, is that the path to be a curandera, curandero, curanderex, and to work on others is a much, much longer journey. And it's not something you can just learn in a book. And one way, I think the best way, is by studying and apprenticing with a teacher, which is what I did for many, many years. But the elements of curanderismo are so useful and helpful for just taking care of our own minds and bodies and spirits. And so I really wanted to create, because there haven't really been many books written on this tradition in the United States by practitioners. A lot of even the books you'll find in Mexico are written by outsider anthropologists or academics. One book that I recommend, that was the book that really changed my life, came out in 1999, called Woman Who Glows in the Dark, by curandera Elena Avila. And since that time, literally, it's probably like less than 5 books written. So I think there's actually a change because now there's a lot of books coming out, which is good because I think the collective consciousness is changing. And what I learned also in my research and interviewing a lot of people who are my elders is that there was definitely a period, and this is in the US and I think in parts of Mexico, but it just really depends on the family you're in and the community. But there is often a pressure to assimilate or to not talk about these practices because they were considered to be like brujeria or witchcraft, or just not what we did anymore. It was like that old wives' tale stuff. So there's definitely generations of that, but I think what has changed in the last really 10, 15, 20 years is definitely more people say, no, this is actually our medicine and it comes from our ancestors. And but speaking of that, and I have a whole chapter on the history, but I think it's always important to name the history of, at least, and this is specific to Mexico and also the Southwest, because that shows the border is just a geopolitical line, right? It's not, didn't exist a long time ago. But the roots of curanderismo really come from the very sophisticated, advanced practices that existed among all the different indigenous people in Mexico before contact. Very advanced systems of medicine, of agriculture, of astronomy, math, all of those things, and including herbal medicine, completely interrupted by colonization, although at the same time preserved in spite of colonization for the past 500 years. So another root, so there's definitely all of the different indigenous people in the past and present whose cultures and practices are part of this tradition. I wrote specifically about the Mexica or Nahuatl people of central Mexico, now what's Mexico City area. Also, another root of the medicine is the perspectives and beliefs and practices that came with the Spanish colonizers, such as even using like candles and praying to La Virgen de Guadalupe or Jesus Cristo or a saint, or even just incorporating Catholic iconography. A lot of that, I think, got incorporated really as a means for people to survive because their indigenous practices were outlawed and you could die for practicing. So people adapted to what was being forced on them, but also a lot of the beliefs and some of our kind of common diagnoses, such as mal de ojo, really kind of, well, that started first in the Middle East through Spain, came to, the American continents. And then another root of curanderismo that often is overlooked because of racism is the African influence and the African contribution. So, and in Mexico, I in my research found that, well, first of all, there was a really huge number of free, no longer enslaved people from Africa in Mexico, in colonial Mexico, who started a lot of their own communities and colonies, and of course had all of their medicine and all their practices that came from whatever part of the African continent they were from. And that at some point in colonial Mexico, like the African healers were actually some of the most sought out by people of all classes and all races. So even like the elite Spanish found that very interesting. And so, so a lot of those, what I always think of is just this kind of collision or this soup of all these different cultures coming together, a lot of exchange, maybe also theft, who knows how people learned about the different practices. So Elena Avila, who I spoke about earlier, she calls it the three-headed serpent, meaning like the curanderismo is a three-headed serpent, these three strong lineages from, indigenous to the Americas, from the African continent, and what came from Europe. So like to honor all of those ancestors. And it's another thing when I talk about this, I always just want to honor all of those who came before all of us, our physical ancestors, our blood ancestors, or maybe our ancestors of our teachers who passed these teachings to us, because a lot of people preserve these traditions over the past 500 years of colonization, at risk to their own lives. And many lives were lost, certainly at the point of in the years of colonization, and since then. So I just feel like it's really good to honor all those who've come before me and us, and that to even have the freedom to just share and talk about this is a blessing and a privilege that I don't take for granted. So I'm going to read a section and welcome, I think maybe another person maybe popped on or two. Thank you, Rebecca, for your comment. If you are new and you want to just, if you haven't written in the chat, just whatever background experience you have with curanderismo in your family or your culture, or if you're just new. So the book has 13 chapters, and that was very intentional. 13 is a very sacred number in this tradition. It relates to the movement of the sun. It relates to what it's called the trecena, or like a kind of like a week in like the Mexica Aztec calendar. So I'm going to read, if any of you have the book already, it's on page 12. Medicine for the Soul. And it starts with a quote by Elena Avila. And she says, "Curanderos believe that it is not enough to just heal the body. One must heal the wounded soul as well." At this time in human history, we're facing the impact of centuries of capitalism, colonization, racism, and genocide. Each day we hear more news about the destruction of the earth and the catastrophic threats to our environment from climate chaos. These events daily impact our mental, emotional, and physical health. People are yearning for ways of healing that not only treat their physical bodies, but also nourish the needs of their hearts and souls. Doña Enriqueta would often tell me that in Mexico, she frequently treated illnesses in people that were the result of poverty and lack of resources. Yet when she traveled to the United States, she most often treated people who suffered from soul sickness. She said that soul sickness was an epidemic here in the United States, especially for those who had to leave their homelands to immigrate to this country. Soul sickness can occur when we become disconnected, usually by experiencing trauma, from our sacred body, our heart, dreams, sexuality, creativity, or spirituality. A disconnection from our roots of family, culture, ancestors, or homeland can result in soul sickness. We can suffer from soul sickness when we forget to live in balance with Mother Earth Donancin. Excessive materialism, greed, and a general lack of spiritual connection can cause soul sickness. Capitalism, racism, sexism, white supremacy, homophobia, transphobia, and xenophobia all cause soul sickness. It can manifest as depression, anxiety, addiction, mental illness, or pain and disease in the physical body. As a system of healing that grew on the blood-soaked soil of genocide and colonization, curanderismo specializes in ways to heal and treat trauma. As Avila writes, there is a need to develop a medicine that could heal the pain and the immense susto, soul loss that resulted from cultural destruction, enslavement, and rape that occurred during the Spanish conquest of the Americas. In curanderismo, we have practices such as limpias, baños, and the temazcal to help call the soul back home into the body. These practices call the soul back home by engaging all 5 senses. Altars adorned with colorful flowers, aromatic bundles of rosemary and sage, heat, steam, and sweat, pungent copal smoke, fragrant herbal tea, sweet chocolate, the gentle touch of loving hands, the heartbeat of the drum. By engaging all our senses, we reawaken to the splendor of life. The vibrancy of color, sound, and smell guide the lost soul back home to its sacred vessel called the body. Our herbs and flowers as medicine of the earth help us remember our connection to Tonantzin, the source of all life, who in turn helps heal us. Curanderismo gives personal and intimate care to each individual and contains the most important ingredient of healing, which is love. People of many backgrounds are drawn to the practices of curanderismo because they crave a method of healing that is based in love and care and treats the wounded soul. This book is an offering to all people who are seeking this kind of healing, especially to those of you for whom this is your ancestral medicine. My hope is that these stories inspire you to learn more, to talk to your abuelas and tias or whomever in your family is the keeper of this knowledge. May these words help awaken your own ancestral memories. I think whoever, Catherine, you are, if you can mute yourself, or Sarah, you can mute Catherine. I think.
Sorry.
Thanks. Yeah.
Can you mute your own? In the corner there, hit the mute. My control. Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, and then I'm not going to read the part, but the next section says a note about language. So this class started being called the Curanderx Toolkit because primarily most of my teachers, 80% of my teachers and 80% of the people in my classes identified as women. Spanish is a very gendered language. So if there's one male identified person in the room, the becomes a O. But then as the class progressed, it really became important for me and the other teachers to change it to Curanderx to really include a word that included, our trans, non-binary, and gender expansive kin, so that, and in a way, and I kind of like Curanderx also because it's a different word and it really feels like it's kind of naming this moment in time as a contemporary experience. Like a lot of us who maybe you had a curandera in your family, or like for me, like I know I could never live up to Doña Enriqueta's like greatness. But I also feel like it's important to, and so a lot of us don't want to say I'm a curandera because it feels like boastful, or I feel like I don't have all that experience of 50 years. But I also feel like it's important to have some way to name those of us who are working in our communities and taking care of each other. So this book, like I said, there's the 13 chapters. I'm going to read another section, but I think that there's a lot of points of entry depending on what you're interested in. So the first chapter I call Seeds, and it's really about my history, and really just the intention and the prayer for the book. And I will say that too, that the book really is a prayer for healing for all beings, especially for, the people for whom this is our ancestral medicine. The second chapter, Roots and Flowers, is about the greater history, some that I talked about, the collision that happened during colonization, and just the different moments in time that made it possible for me even to write this book, especially like the civil rights movement, the American Indian movement, the Chicano, rights movement, United Farm Workers movement. A lot of people who were my elders and mentors were parts of those movements. And again, it really shifted the permission from assimilation to like, no, we're going to have pride in our culture. Third chapter I called Remembering Ancestral Ways of Wellness, because I feel like, I'll just say for my own self, like walking this path of my own healing and also supporting other people in their healing, I've had to continuously decolonize my thinking, because a lot of, I guess, what I grew up believing was very much like, you go to the doctor, you take a pill, you're okay, or they do this or that. It really isn't about like self-care. It's not about community care. I mean, the health care, quote, I don't even like to call it healthcare system, but quote healthcare, because it's not very caring and it's not about health. It's really like it's an industry, right? Medical industrial complex. It leaves a lot of people, kicks a lot of people to the curb, or doesn't even bring any kind of care to them. So that chapter is really trying to, but also it's trying to help me decolonize my thinking, but also to offer some exercises and practices and ways of just thinking about healing. And I will say, for me, one essential part of that is that we heal in community. Like, we don't get sick individually. Like, it's always, we are like a cell in a community. That's our family, that's our neighborhood, that's our culture, that's our ancestors. And we are all interconnected. And so the healing, I believe, is a community experience, which should not be connected to profit. Chapter 4, self-care is a revolutionary act, which I believe, and that's a quote from Audre Lorde, great Black lesbian feminist. And then I move into chapter 5, creating sacred space, and that has a little bit of cosmology from the Mexica Nahuatl people. I'm also a danzante, I'm like a Mexica Aztec dancer, and that practice really grounded me in a cosmology of my Mexican ancestors. I don't think were Nahuatl, but the Nahuatl people, what I've learned from history, when they became empowered, they incorporated a lot of practices or a lot of information from a lot of other cultures. So learning danza and learning how to relate to the universe and learning like the different names for the directions of the 4 directions, which we call Naucampa, was really important for me to kind of have it like a spiritual root to a cosmology that informs the healing work that I'm doing. And then I like to say, first and foremost, I'm an herbalist. I'm a plant person. I practice as a clinical herbalist. I make herbal products. I teach. I started a school on herbal medicine. So really, heart of the book is about herbalism. So chapter 6 is herbal allies. So really, one of the things I really, in my teaching, tried to convey now as an author, to really encourage people to develop relationship with plants, to grow them, to make medicine out of them, to really just, because that relationship alone as a plant is another, as a living being, is part of the healing. So to, again, decolonize our mindset. It's not, we don't just necessarily go to the store and buy this thing, but it's about a relationship. Chapter 7, tending to our gardens. So this book was based in, the Bay Area in Oakland. And I really wanted, again, to encourage people to grow their own medicine and learn about what the plants that grow really easily in that area. So a lot of it is about 13 plants, 13 key plants in this tradition, such as rosemary, romero, that's the Spanish for rosemary, rue or ruda, salvia or sage, pirul, pericon. So, and in California, at least in the Bay Area, like a lot of these grow really easily, practically without any, pampering. So I really wanted to encourage people to like learn to identify the plants that are around them and grow them so that they're available for them, when we need to do a limpia, or we need to make a tea, or we need to tend to whatever is going on with our bodies or our spirits. And I know you're in a different ecosystem, but a lot of these plants, a lot of them are very hardy in many climates. Like I moved from the Bay to New Mexico, so I've been learning a very steep learning curve of adjusting to the high desert where it does freeze and it gets really hecka hot in the summer. But something like rosemary is just like a champion, like it can grow here. So it can grow in a lot of climates. And then I move in chapter 8, I call cultivating a medicine making practice, really shifting into teaching people how to make tea, tinctures, cordials, flower essences. Chapter 9, nourishment, herbal tonics and food as medicine. So, you know, and so many cultural medicines, like the primary way to take medicine into our body is not necessarily as a herbal remedy, but it's first and foremost in food. So a lot of the ingredients in traditional Mexican cooking, such as chile or oregano or even onions and garlic, are very medicinal. So I write about all of them and have some recipes. Chapter 10, energy and boundaries. I think it's a really important thing to think about as we interface with the world. It's how to protect ourselves, how to clean ourselves off, and even like, what does that mean to have boundaries? What is our energy body? And this is, again, from this cultural perspective. Chapter 11, it's called Dancing with Los Aires. And this has to do with the concept of winds, or aires, or mal aire, that is very much I guess folk knowledge, folk wisdom. And one of my primary teachers, Estela Roman, talks about the aires as being emotional winds. So like when and this is also in the culture as well, such as we have sustos, that means we had a fear or a shock or a fright, or espanto, it's more like a spooky fear, like afraid of something or being spooked by something supernatural, like a ghost. So anyways, it's learning how to work with when we are, but it's also things like anger or sadness or anxiety. So really identifying these energies that we, you know, in English, in the US, we often call emotions, but trying to look at them in a little different perspective, but also learning how to work with them. In chapter 12, cleansing ourselves, limpias and baños, that's like, okay, we have a susto, which, you know, that could happen, like I got in a car accident, or I witnessed an accident, or I was in an earthquake, or I was assaulted. I mean, or many, many, many things. I mean, I think susto is at all-time high now, and, you know, and I know the person who works with youth, I just have so much, my heart goes out to the youth, and just like the environments they're living in, where, you know, kids are having to think about wearing bulletproof jackets to school, right? That wasn't my experience, you know, as a young person in the 70s and 80s. So, you know, so that ambient and fear and real trauma that's pretty much nonstop is, you know, in this tradition we call susto, and so there's ways to work with it, that with the plants and with, you know, simple practices. And then the last chapter is called La Medicina of Dreams. I really feel like learning to attune to our dreams is a big part of our healing. So I'm going to read another section, let's see how I'm doing on time. Does anyone have any questions or comments so far? You could put it in the chat or unmute yourself. Okay. Or what? I was going to read another part from the intro. Oh yeah, I will. Is this? I mean, the first chapter really kind of talks about why I feel like this is, or not just I, but many people think that this is important medicine. And, oh, one other thing I want to say about the book is that I felt like it was important that as the author, that I center myself as one member in a community. Like, there's many people in my community who are either my teachers or my comadres or my students, who are all working together in this movement. And everyone has a different contribution. And so I highlighted 13 different people, and I was going to just show you, let's see, because Maria's like the first one, and also shared their stories, because and here's Maria Miranda, as I told you, she was the person who brought me in the danza, and it has their first person accounts for the most part of just their own story, how they came to practicing curanderismo or healing or danza, So I think the power of story and the power of people being able to, hear someone else's story, maybe relate to their struggle, or even just, for me, like interviewing Maria is when I really learned a lot about the history of my elders, the people who raised me or nurtured me as a little seedling. Okay, so this is page 15, medicine for resilience. I'll take one sip of water first. While I was in the middle of writing this book, the entire world was turned upside down due to the COVID-19 global pandemic. In the United States, we have suffered a devastating loss of life and jobs, and many people have lost their housing. The pandemic has exposed the great inequities in healthcare as Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities have been impacted disproportionately. The combined factors of racism, social inequity, and lack of access to healthcare have created higher rates of both COVID-19 infection and mortality in these communities. We have witnessed too many examples where the most vulnerable members of our communities are overlooked and disregarded by government and healthcare during this pandemic. In the early days of the pandemic, not only did toilet paper quickly disappear from the shelves of grocery stores, but so did any herbal medicine that treated viruses or the symptoms of COVID-19. I realized that when we are dependent on outside sources for our medicine, those sources can quickly vanish. The disappearance of medicine of all kinds has played out often in times of natural disaster, such as after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. What can we do to prepare ourselves for these disasters that are inevitable due to climate crisis? The intention of this book is to encourage you to build relationship with plants so that you have many herbal allies to support you and your loved ones in the circumstances of daily life, as well as in times of crisis. The intention is also to empower everyone to grow their own herbs and to learn how to use these plants as medicine. When our medicine is growing in our communities, much of what we need will already be available in our gardens when the next natural disaster or pandemic occurs. Curanderismo is a tradition rooted in people's resilience, and the surge of interest in it in the United States is coming at a crucial time. The ancestors of this tradition are calling many of us to remember these practices so that we can learn to be more resilient in the face of hardship and trauma. The intention of this book is to be a resource for our collective healing. My prayer is that the words I share may inspire all who are called to a healing path to work together to support one another, our families, and our communities through these challenging and transformative times. That kind of sums up some of my intention and my prayer. We are about at time if anyone has any questions or comments. I was told about 45 minutes and a little bit of time for Q&A. So you can
I just have a quick question. The cempasúchil flower, can you do teas with that or?
definitely. Yeah, I write about it in the book. And it was,
I read some, but I wasn't able to see if actually you can. It says it's good for the stomach, but I didn't know you can actually drink it.
yeah, no, you can definitely drink it. Yeah, it's a very powerful and safe herbal remedy for many, many things, for the stomach, for respiratory, for skin, for the nerves. The only thing I would say is make sure, like, if you buy it, that it's not hasn't been heavily sprayed. So you try to get it organic or something that's, I mean, that's true for all herbal medicines. But yeah, you can definitely make a tea. I've been drinking it. Oh, well, you can't see it, but I drink it year round. It's really good, especially if you have any kind of inflammation or irritation anywhere in your GI tract. It has many benefits.
I'm sorry. So you will say like how many leaves of this flower would it do for like
Yeah, well,
one cup of tea?
yeah, I like to make tea in like mason jars. You know, I would do like if you have it fresh, you could do just like maybe like 4 flower, like a flower per cup.
Okay.
And you can let it steep. I do have in the book like how to make tea. I'd make it as an infusion. So you get you put the herbs in the jar, cover it with hot water, and then let it sit for a while. The longer you sit, it will get stronger and more potent. So that's, and you can mix it with other plants. Like I like to mix mine with chamomile and mint, but yeah. And if you have it dried, I would just do about like a teaspoon per cup.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Neen, I'm guessing Sarah would be the one to answer.
Yeah, I was just popping onto the calendar or the catalog there. It looks like Middletown has a hard copy, and there's also a Hoopla, which is the ebook version available for Newburgh cardholders. You can also put in what is called a purchase alert request, so you can request the library to purchase it.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, there is not an audio version yet. Maybe that's like the next iteration. Thank you for asking. I could talk to my publisher about that. Any other questions? Yeah, I can answer herbal questions too. Yeah, the cempasúchil, I don't have it. I had it on my altar behind me, but it got a little wilted. But that's the one that's very common on our altars and Dia de los Muertos. And that's how I first learned about it, because it's the one I would get and put on the altar for the ancestors. But again, as an herbalist, I'm like, does it have medicinal properties? And because it wasn't taught to me in herbal school, but it turns out it's full of medicinal properties, and it's also a plant that's native, indigenous to Mexico. So it's one that's been used for millennia there, and that has become popular and all around the world. So other resources on curanderismo. So yeah, I said that Elena Avila's a woman, I can put it in the chat. Woman Who Glows in the Dark by Elena Avila. The UNM, that's University of Mexico. They have a curanderismo class that's on, they both have it online and in person, and they also have a Coursera class that I think is free. I teach a class of the same name that is on Zoom. So I'll put my contact info here. We're kind of wrapping up session, or the year now, but it will start again in the spring. And then I'll put my website. But there's a lot of classes popping up. I don't know particularly in your area. And there's other books. I know one that came out that I don't have yet. It was called Earth Medicine. I think the author is Felicia Ruiz. And books by Cheo Torres. He's the one from University of New Mexico. He's written multiple books. Thanks for that question. Any other questions or comments? We have, a few more minutes.
Did you say you had there was a unit on Coursera?
On Coursera, yeah, through the University of New Mexico curanderismo class. Yeah, I teach on Zoom, and I'm working on a teachable class, but it's still in the works. But I know there's a lot of other people teaching.
The library does subscribe to Coursera, so if you have a Newburgh Free Library card, you can access their database and look for it.
Cool. Yeah, I think if you, I mean, I could Google it now, but if you just put University of New Mexico curanderismo, it'll probably take you to that class. Any other questions or comments? I don't know if we could close, or if I have one short little. If there's anything else that wants to be read. Oh yeah, I'm going to quote one of my maestras, my elder Ellie, because we'll just end with dreams. The book ends with dreams, and a picture of California poppy, which is a good plant for sleeping. So this is not me, but it's in the book, Eleanor Baron Dreckery. She says, on this fearless path of the dreamer, you will recover the brilliance that is normally beyond your reach and out of view. You've actually decided to come awake within the great dream. You will recognize that waking life is the dream, and that dreaming is the time where real decisions are made, where the eyes witness the internal light of life. So with that, the quote by my elder, I think we can wrap up. Oh, cool. And I see your message, Neen. Yeah, I'd love to have, I guess ask the library to invite me back. Could be even a workshop, like this was just like a book talk, but I mean, any topic in this book, I could do a short, more specific, like herbal medicine or making medicine or cempasúchil or whatever. So thank you for that comment. Thank you, Sarah, for moderating. I think you're
Sorry there. Thank you for being our presenter. I can put the email in the chat here of who you would contact if you want to request a program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm also going to put in the school that I started in Oakland. It's kind of similar to my website. It's about to be transferred to oops, I didn't spell it right. A new owner, but they will continue classes in curanderismo and ancestral medicine, ancestral apothecary school. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for the invitation. Newburgh Free Library. Now I know why you're called the Free Library. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you everyone for showing up. Yeah, if there's not any other questions, I guess we can close the Zoom.
Thank you again, and everyone have a good evening.
Okay, bye. Nice to meet you all. Take care.